The TalkSport Fan Network.
The ultimate on-demand destination for the UK's best fan-led football podcasts.
Want authentic supporter insight on all things Bournemouth? Follow Up the Cherries in all departments on the TalkSport Fan Network.
Club-dedicated content created by the fans, for the fans.
Search TalkSport Fan Network.
Welcome everybody to our brand new show here on Up the Cherries in all departments. It's not so much a Cherries show, so Premier League fans across the country, and EFL fans across the country, and also the global football community, get involved, get those comments in, give us your thoughts. Has football a problem, or football has a problem? I'm basically saying it as that, but I do have a very, very, very trusted companion right next to me, and it is the one, the only Manny Thangadurai. How you doing, Manny?
I'm all good, thank you, Craig, and I love how you said trusted. I think it sort of sums me up, I'd like to think. I'm not blowing my own trumpet, but
definitely.
I'm always happy to be a part of anything and everything the channel will do, as long as, you know, I'm informed beforehand. And I make time for this. It's never a chore, always a pleasure. And this is something which is certainly, it'll certainly have the potential to be rather interesting, or I wouldn't say groundbreaking, but definitely it'll probe a lot of questions and, you know, make people start to think a little bit more. And that's what I'm looking forward to.
We might even upset fans along the way, but if you are upset by anything that we say, it's nothing against any club, apart from Spurs and Southampton, mind, but...
Talk about spoiler alerts.
But it's nothing against any club. It is just opinions, and you're more than welcome to yours as well. And I just want to say a big shout out as well to our two channel sponsors, Dental on the Banks and Touchpoint Telecoms as well. Thank you to everybody as well who is listening to us on Spotify, Amazon Podcasts, and the such like. So it's great to have you with us. But let's get stuck into topic one of Football Has a Problem, and that is rogue owners. So, Manny, there's plenty of rogue owners out there, unfortunately. And it's one of those things. I was watching something earlier on, and again, a very, very trusted face in sport was turning around and saying about the issues that at certain clubs and how no football fan should be overjoyed, even if you are, and this is taking it, you know, out of context now. I know we mentioned Spurs and Southampton at the start. I wouldn't want Saints to disappear. I wouldn't want any club to disappear. And likewise, I'm pretty sure you wouldn't want Tottenham Hotspur to disappear because of a rogue owner.
No, not by any means. And I will tell you right now, I think you might know, actually, that I do have some good friends who are Spurs fans, including quite a few who we know, both know very well. My brother-in-law happens to be a Tottenham fan. And, you know, for all of the talk about the tribal-like rivalry between us, more often than not, we tend to bring out the best in one another. And that's the thing about these local derbies. As much as there is a level of, you know, I wouldn't necessarily say hatred, but definitely a level of disliking. You know, you raise your game because you want those bragging rights. And that's why, you know, you need to have these rivals still sticking around. And as you said, no club should go down because of a rogue owner, especially not a rival club. And I don't know if Spurs are in danger of, you know, suffering a very, very bad fate, but you know, relegation is a possibility. I don't quite think it'll happen, but stranger things have happened in football.
Well, of course, I don't think the ownership at Spurs has really helped them by appointing Igor Tudor. I don't think that really they helped by, you know, bringing in Thomas Frank after Ange Postecoglou had done such a good job there. But admittedly, they made that change. They made that decision. And hey, lo and behold, it's kind of backfired on them as a football club. But there's a lot worse owners out there than, Enoch and Daniel Levy. And we're going to go firstly to the crisis club at the moment in the EFL, which is Sheffield Wednesday. Of course, their previous owner, Dejphon Chansiri, has now left the club. They do have 4 interested parties. They did give exclusivity earlier on in the season to an interested party. That interested party didn't come to fruition for whatever reason. I don't know the situation as solidly as I'm sure Sheffield Wednesday fans will do. But this is the problem that football has, is that Sheffield Wednesday have had a rogue owner who have driven them into the ground, who have been at odds with the fan base. Sheffield Wednesday this season are on -7 points. They've only achieved 11 points, so they've had an 18-point deduction. And now it's been confirmed that they are going to start with a 15-point deduction in League One. And I just think it's completely and utterly out of order for the EFL or the Premier League or whoever to do this to a football club when they fought so hard, not badly, but so hard against an owner who has been troublesome to a football club for so long. What do you make of the situation at Sheffield Wednesday?
I'll be brutally honest with you, Craig. It's tragic in many ways, especially when you consider what's happened to Sheffield Wednesday over the years. They were, of course, a founder member of the Premier League, and as an Arsenal fan, I remember them only too well because when we achieved the domestic cup double in 92-93, despite finishing in 10th, we beat Sheffield Wednesday in both finals. And I do seem to remember that we did play a fairly pivotal role in getting Sheffield Wednesday relegated along with Crystal Palace and Nottingham Forest from the Premier League. And so since then, on a few occasions, they've had to fight their way back up, and they were back in the Premiership for a few seasons. But since then, things haven't really, been in their favour. And as far as this chap, Chansiri, is concerned, he really has a lot for which to answer. And we're going to obviously talk a little bit more about the issue of rogue owners. But when you have a situation where any club is left in so much debt and financial uncertainty, it's definitely a bad reflection on the owner itself, and also how the financials have been run. And again, it also sort of segues into the issue of how other clubs in the Football League pyramid are being run in terms of maintaining their finances. So it's a horrible state of affairs, and this particular owner in question is another Thai owner, just like the owners of Leicester City, who are also facing a big struggle to avoid relegation from the Championship. And to think that 10 years ago they were Premiership winners, and then 5 seasons later they won the FA Cup, and they were doing so well under Brendan Rodgers, and then things just, nosedived in a way. But sadly, it seems that financial mismanagement is not new when it comes to footballing clubs. It can either be the case of a negligent owner who writes checks he simply can't cash, pun intended, or ends up being completely profligate. And in some cases, you find clubs who are tempted by the prospect of, being able to punch above their weight on a continental level and earn some success. So they end up having to, take a little bit more money and offer a little bit more leverage. And when it doesn't work out, the club ends up suffering. Think of Leeds United back in the early 2000s, and even Portsmouth as well, not long after they won the FA Cup under the management of a certain Henry James Redknapp.
Yes.
And the worst part is the clubs end up suffering, the fans end up suffering. I think when you take a look at how Portsmouth have somehow managed to recover and are trying to, fight their way back, there is hope. And especially Glasgow Rangers' recovery from being completely forced to bottom out and start again from the very bottom and find their way back to the top. There is some hope. The only problem is things will end up being a lot worse for Sheffield Wednesday before they can get better. And I will admit I'm not too sure specifically about the details of financial mismanagement, but it shouldn't be enough that Chansiri has ended up, leaving the club. I think he's got a lot to answer, and I'd like to think that some of these owners in particular who are guilty of deliberate, gross financial mismanagement, they need to literally have the book thrown at them. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, 100%. And it's always the fans that, fall foul of this. Might as well bring in a cluster of other clubs that have also suffered these sort of issues. Wigan, probably coped at the time with it the best. Bolton Wanderers, of course, were minutes, if not hour, if not seconds away from going out of business. Derby County, and of course Reading, who we've covered in quite some detail. Of course, Dejphon, the owner at Reading, put the financial mess on that club after that was so well run by John Medeski beforehand was absolutely catastrophic. You think exactly how much the wage bill actually increased to. It was 370% of turnover at one point. And I can appreciate that sometimes, and Leicester City, as you say there, Manny, have completely fallen off a cliff. Unfortunately, Vichy passed away in that awful helicopter accident, and his son Top has, of course, taken the reins. I don't think Top is, of course, as inspirational or as much of a businessman as Vichy was, but as much as the effects of a business, could happen. So with regards to Chansiri, understand, he's lost a lot of money because of ventures outside of football. Likewise, the King Power Group, again, lots of ventures outside of football. And of course, Dejphon at Reading supposedly lost a lot of money. These sort of business issues should not be feeding them their way into football and causing a club like Sheffield Wednesday to be absolutely under the cosh, because we could have a situation. Sheffield Wednesday have had a depleted side all season, hence their minus 7 points on the board. They've only achieved 11 points so far this season from a minus 18 start. It's possible that we might see one of the oldest and one of the most successful football clubs in this country, one of the first FA Cup winners to still, be existing in the professional game, end up in League Two in a couple of years' time.
It is a very sad state of affairs, and I did read quite a bit about what Chansiri was doing, and obviously, this is another reason why I'm so happy to have Wikipedia now, but it's another reminder that for these shows, I will have to do my research beforehand, so please forgive me for my unprofessionalism. And I mean it, Craig. I'm apologising to you right now on the air.
No. Honestly, you have got so much knowledge about the game that, it's always a pleasure to have you with us. So honestly, don't apologise.
Yeah, right. So, well, thank you very much indeed, mate. And according to the source that I have, he did invest quite heavily in his first season owning the club after acquiring the club in full, a huge stake. And obviously the target was to get promotion to the Premier League. And he brought in quite a few players, including the likes of Philippe Melo, who certainly was well known for. I mean, I'm not too sure you could say that he was well known. He was more of a journeyman player, but obviously, there was an attempt to try to get some players who were well versed, as you would say, in playing Championship football and trying to get them into the Premier League. And he wanted to build that team. And of course, they actually ended up, earning promotion back to the Championship when Darren Moore was manager, but it took a little bit long. And obviously before then they had quite a few playoff disappointments and so forth. And in between, of course, results were not really that good. His own investment, Chansiri, began to dry up a little bit. And then, managers were sacked almost left, right and centre. And there was just a great deal of instability. And they were relegated to League One, actually, after 9 years in the Championship. But it was Moore who got them back into the Championship. And then the struggles just continue. And the biggest thing about Chansiri is, the breaches of regulations regarding payment obligations and so forth, how the club wasn't, balancing the books properly, falling foul of, PSR. And it was found that he was leveraging debt against the stadium. And when you have that sort of activity taking place, when you have an owner like that who is literally willing to go rogue with his with the way he's conducting himself, at least on a financial paradigm, you're asking for trouble. And this is another reason why there needs to be a proper screening process, I would say, in terms of getting some proper quality owners who have feasible plans to try and take the club forward, but also have proper plans of how to make it happen financially, and also do things in a proper way. Basically making sure that everything is by the book, because all of the activities that are taking place under Chansiri, I think it just beggars belief, and it makes you wonder how many more people are doing this, and how many more managers have done it in the past, and have they been adequately censured or punished for their misdeeds?
Yeah,
it's terrible.
No, 100%, 100%. And one thing that is a trend with all of these owners, especially Derby, of course, Bolton, Reading, and Sheffield Wednesday, is all of these clubs were in the Championship at the time. They were all in the Championship, and they were going for the golden egg, which was to get that football club into the Premier League, to actually get that football club into a Premier League position and therefore make their money back. And they're gambling with the future of a football club by just doing that. So, Manny, here's a question for you. I know that there's been lots of talk about an independent regulator, which does make sense, but is there another way that football can actually manage this? Do they give the fans a stake to be able to remove? Because the fans at this moment in time of Sheffield Wednesday are helpless. The fans of Reading, Bolton, Derby, Wigan, and everybody else, Morecambe we can throw into that as well, who sadly lost their place in the Football League last season because of a rogue owner. All these clubs' fans are completely helpless. And hey, if it happens to AFC Bournemouth, we'll be helpless as well. If it happens, I would be completely shocked if it did, but it's still a threat to every single football club in existence. If it even happened to a big club like Arsenal, again, the fans would be completely and utterly helpless apart from doing the protesting, because there's nobody that can go in and remove one of these rogue owners, without getting points deductions and the like.
And the worst part about this, Craig, in this case, is that when Chansiri bought the club, he literally invested in the club in its entirety. He had a full 100% stake. So when he invested in that money, I'm pretty sure he must have, coughed up the money in its entirety, if not immediately, then certainly over an agreed period of time. So that would mean that any attempt to try and wrest the club from his control would always be a struggle, because you literally have to prise it from his cold, dead fingers, literally. And it also does segue into the issue of whether fan ownership could be an issue, because not too long ago, you might remember the controversy about the Super League, where some of the bigger clubs in the Premiership and in Europe were some of those bigger clubs were planning on breaking away, as it were. And there were some fan protests as well. And some of the protests around Old Trafford, I remember, got a little bit out of hand, with fans running into the stadium and, throwing flares and so forth. And that was actually the moment when it was realized that with fans being so emotional, fan ownership is almost, not feasible.
Yeah.
And as much as I sympathize with the fans, you can't just allow those base emotions to take over if you are that serious about being stakeholders in your club's future. And why it works in Germany is, there's always that stereotype about Germans being a little bit more emotionally stoic than the Brits, as it were. They control their emotions. They're very professional and, very just so in that regard. Well, we Brits are starting to display a little bit of a softer upper lip, as it were. But, having said all of that, it's never really a good thing when you see the fans being taken for a ride like this. And I really do believe that the lower you go in the food chain, that is the Football League pyramid, the more we might have to consider seeing fan ownership being more and more of a reality. It's going to be difficult as well, because the situation in England, as you will know, Craig, is that one city can have as many as 2 or 3 different football clubs. And I'm not just talking about the bigger cities like London and Birmingham and Manchester. If you go to some of the other big, smaller cities or bigger towns around the country, you'll find that there are about 2, there could be 2 clubs. You think of Bristol City and Bristol Rovers. And of course, you can't talk about Sheffield Wednesday without mentioning Sheffield United, Owls versus the Blades, the Steel City derby. So again, it's going to be a little bit difficult in that regard. Maybe if the city of Sheffield were to perhaps get involved and try and work on something to try to take ownership of the club and make it more of a city-owned endeavour, then at least in the short term there will be some financial stability, and it could lead to not too many jobs being lost. But again, it does segue back into the main issue about rogue owners. We're going to have to start really scrutinising these guys, and we really are going to have to make sure that we get their tax records collected, and especially if we also have to make sure that they report as well to His Majesty's Revenue and Customs, because obviously another big issue is that they haven't been able to pay those bills. And when you don't pay those bills, you end up suffering. It's like, if you don't file your taxes in time, you will literally be, taken to the cleaners by HMRC. And that's not what anyone wants to do. It also would behoove these potential foreign owners to be given a crash course on the tax structure in the UK and how they're expected to respond effectively. Because I don't want to see a situation where any of these foreign owners are allowed to buy these clubs, pump money in, but then decide not to pump in money after a peak of ill temper, and then put the club in jeopardy. Now, not that certain British owners can be off the hook. I speak of a certain Jim Ratcliffe, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to start really regulating, I wouldn't say regulating, but definitely scrutinizing a lot of these potential club owners. Because the stories that I'm reading from some of these owners, Craig, just awful.
Yep. And, like we covered, and we covered it mainly because, of course, it is my hometown, Reading, where I grew up, and it was a terrible situation for them. Now, luckily, Reading survived, but, anybody, and there was people, you saw it on social media, which, of course, is, an awful place most of the time, wanting Reading to go under. And there's fans I've already seen, when I was doing a little bit of scouting ahead of this, there's fans out there, and I don't see them as proper fans, wanting Sheffield United, Sheffield Wednesday to disappear. Sorry, Sheffield Wednesday fans. You can have a go at me for that in the comments. But, wanting Sheffield Wednesday to disappear. And I think it's just wrong. But surely there is a percentage of each football club, and the likes of Arsenal and Manchester United and Spurs and Chelsea and whoever and Liverpool, they'll never be fan-owned clubs anymore because they're too big. They are ran as businesses. They are, to actually do what they are set out to do, they have to have millions, if not billions, to pumped into those football clubs. So they'll never be fan owned. But if there was a percentage, say 5%, which has got fan ownership behind it, if, let's say, one of the owners goes rogue, I won't name any, but, if one of the owners of one of those top clubs goes rogue, then, the fans can get them out. Now, we're going back to years and years and years ago at yours truly, AFC Bournemouth, of course, we weren't particularly well owned, and I'm sure that everybody, and if anybody hasn't understood the Bournemouth story so far, there's 2 interviews on this channel to watch. The first one is Jeff Mostyn. The second one is with Eddie Mitchell. And do go and check actually a third one that comes in 2 parts with Trevor Watkins. Those 3 videos in particular will actually explain the whole story of AFC Bournemouth and the mess we was in and how those men actually helped this club. But going back to years ago, Manny, there was fans putting into their own pockets and investing in the Cherries share to try and save this football club. This football club will never, ever, ever be fan-owned ever again because it has become too big. The stadium is going to get bigger. So even if Bill Foley goes rogue, which I'm sure he's not going to, and I've got full faith in him, the thing is that we would be relying on a bigwig out there, whoever, somewhere, don't know where, to come out and pay and get that person out of our football club. And it shouldn't be the way. Do you think that a 5% share in a football club where those fans have got a say, a push, a direction, could actually help stop these rogue owners in the future?
I like the idea, Craig. And the only thing I would say is that if you were to make it 10%, then it would definitely be a little bit more of a big chunk. And that would definitely be a big incentive for the fans to really become a little bit more proactive. You know, we have some issues at Arsenal as well with the way Stan Kroenke and his family are running things. I call them the Crankies with a good enough reason. I don't need to necessarily articulate on that. And there was actually a time when we were hoping that the Spotify owner, Daniel Ek, would, agree to buy the club and cough up some money. But then it's also going to be a problem if certain owners decide that they don't want to sell. Now, this is going to be obviously a big test of the integrity of certain owners. And I'd like to think that the way Bill Foley is doing things at AFC Bournemouth, he's got you in a good place. He's sort of, 100%. Above board. And I don't believe that he will, leave you lot in the lurch. And I would probably go so far to say that, if he doesn't want to, if he were to decide to sell the club eventually, for whatever reason it may be, then I'm sure there will be a good faith reason, and he will be responsible enough to lead the talks for a potential successor. But we're not really seeing that with Stan Kroenke. In comparison to his American franchises, which are basically, proper sports teams that have a legacy or a history of winning, what he's doing is effectively running the club like a glorified hedge fund. And I will be, forthright on this and say that he does deserve a great deal of credit and gratitude for being able to help solve the problem of the stadium debt. And he's left us financially more well off. But we're struggling on the football side of things. And even now, despite the fact that we are top of the league and in a really good space in the Champions League, it's still not expected that we might even go too far and even win a quadruple, as some people have misguidedly said. And footballing success is something that can never be intangible, because that is what, keeps the fans engaged. Nothing succeeds like success. As a football fan, I don't care about the footsie, the FTSE. I care about the football. And so as financially well run as Arsenal may be, I don't want us to be known as a tin pot club that doesn't care about, improving and winning silverware and doing what we need to do. And, that is the biggest complaint that we have. And especially given how Spurs were able to win that Europa League trophy and did so quite I wouldn't say brilliantly, but, you have to give Ange Postecoglou credit. He did what he said he was going to do, and he made sure he did it. And, anyone who has the ability to, lay it on the table, for want of a nicer word, as one of my friends would say, that person deserved the benefit of doubt. And this also segues into how the Spurs owners have been nothing but disingenuous. When they talk so much about wanting to try and compete in all four fronts and be a club of standards who can compete on all fronts, and they refuse to facilitate that by making sure that the wage structure is, altered to attract better players, and also actually signing better players rather than signing younger players, it's as if they're expecting managers and players to make silk purses out of sows' ears. And that is just, unfair. It's unsustainable. And sooner or later, the fans are going to literally catch on to that and say, what do you take us for a bunch of clowns? So as you say, Craig, Spurs, I don't think will ever be fan-owned, because as our good friend Eugene from Malaysia has he said when you interviewed him that day, the club has more or less become too big to go down. There are some amazing alternative streams of revenue with the NFL teams coming and playing and some concerts being held there. And so, they're always going to be very financially sound and an excellent financial model. But as far as a footballing team is concerned, they're an absolute joke. And the fact that they sacked the manager who won them that European trophy, that more or less adds to that, you see. Mm. So going back to your question about fan ownership, I would like to see that for quite a few of the smaller clubs, because it's like the smaller the club you are in terms of stature, the more community-based it might be. That's the way I would see it. And so you will see that club being more of, a bridge to the game for the people in terms of greater community involvement, and how, it's got more of a village style. I can't say a village style, but more of, a laid back, definite family/community feel to it. So I would like to see more of more steps taken to increase the possibility of fan ownership. The only problem is, financially, is it going to be feasible? Emotionally, will they be able to? Can they be trusted to make some tough decisions for the good of the club? It's a question that probably may not have an easy answer, and it's certainly a question that can only really be answered through honest and forthright dialogue as to what fans want to do, what they need to do, what is expected of them, and what they want from their team. And I think that might be, in the future, the way forward. And especially if you're going to have these foreign owners who refuse to keep themselves, up to date on the issue of UK taxes, then that just sums it all up. You have some owners who just want the prestige of, owning a sports team, but who couldn't really care less about how the sports team is run. And as we agree, the fans end up suffering as a result. I hope we'll see a lot more fan involvement, but as you said, it's like the bigger you are, the more sustainable you are, for want of that word, the more unlikely it will happen. And I'm also going to talk about Aston Villa, where a certain two former Cherries, Tyrone Mings and Morgan Rogers, are playing their football. That club is, at this moment under Unai Emery, aspiring for great things. They're qualifying for Europe every single year. They're punching above their weight in the Premier League, consistently finishing in the top 5/top 6. They are going through a dreadful slump of form, but they are joint third now behind Manchester United on goal difference. And if they do manage to beat Manchester United at Old Trafford after their Europa League game on Thursday, I should say, against Lille, they'll end up getting back into third. And the way this league has become so bonkers, you still can't quite rule them out of a title bid, although their poor squad quality and injuries have hurt them. But they've been beset with problems with PSR for several years now. I mean, you could say several years, you could say a bit of time. And they're in a situation where they literally have to sell their one of their best players every season. It's a sad state of affairs, because no sooner do players do really well and form a huge bond with the fans that they end up having to say their goodbyes. And I know professional sport is a little bit ruthless and there's no room for sentiment, but still, I'm shocked at how cutthroat it can be. So in addition to having to sell more than a few of their players, they also have to incorporate a very low net spend, which is, of course, the lowest in the Premier League in terms of transfers. That is, they have to make sure they sell before they can buy, and provide that kind of net spend to offset the issues with PSR. And in order to make sure they avoid being cited in the future, they have to make sure they keep qualifying for Europe or preferably the Champions League on a regular basis. And they have a magnificent manager in Unai Emery who is more than capable of doing that, even if, as has been proved so far, he probably can't quite get them to actually competing for league titles. I think he can still win a cup or two. I'd love to see him win the Europa League. And for what it's worth, as I said, you still can't quite discount them from the Premiership. But I'd like to think this is a club which is trying to learn from what happened with Leeds United and Portsmouth and other clubs back in the day. And they're having a balancing act in terms of deciding which players stay and which players have to be sold. And after this season, there will definitely be a cull of players, because several members of that squad, mind you, were around when Dean Smith was manager.
Yes, yeah.
That puts it into perspective a great deal, including Tyrone himself. You had someone like Tammy Abraham, who was a big star in their promotion campaign. He was re-signed. Then don't forget the likes of Ross Barkley, Douglas Luiz, Esri Konsa, John McGinn, and one or two others I might have missed. Emi Martinez joined in 2020 when Dean Smith was manager. So that squad is in need of, refreshing and renewal. And they've got to do a balancing act. But so far, I think they're doing a pretty good job. And I've really, really been impressed with the way they've played this season, in stark contrast at times to Arsenal, whose play has, I have to say, been at times diabolical. And I will say that, Craig. I mean, I know we're top of the league, but we're not exactly winning fans with the way we play. But, it's going to be difficult for them. And that's another reason why I would love to see them continuing to succeed. If only as well because I have nothing but respect for Unai Emery and believe that he was very shabbily treated during his time at Arsenal. But then there are some fans who will respectfully disagree.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing pleasure of this episode of Football Has a Problem. I just want to give a big shout out again to our two sponsors. Firstly, Touchpoint Telecoms at touchpointtelecoms.co.uk. Get in contact with Mark and the team for all your business telecoms needs. And of course, Dental on the Banks at dentalonthebanks.co.uk. You can find them on Haven Road in Canford Cliffs for all your dental requirements. And here's a little bit about them now.
I should be like you, Mel.
So there we go. Thank you to our two sponsors. And now, back with the main event. Well, I tell you what, let's talk about two Lancashire clubs. This is where I want to go next, really. And there is this stigma, Manny, that foreign investment's not always been particularly good. Foreign owners don't get football. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of bad foreign owners, but it alarmed me when I was having a look at this. One club I'm going to mention now is Blackpool. Of course, got into the Premier League quite famously, managed to, put up a real good fight. They did lose their place at the first time of asking, but there was all sorts of issues going on with the owners taking legal action, banning fans from the ground. This is why fan ownership or a fan investment, even at 5-10%, is so key to actually stop that. And the second Lancashire club I'm going to mention have effectively had to restart again from the very bottom. Were pretty much ever present in the EFL, and that's Bury. And do you know what connects these two clubs? Neither of their owners were foreign. Both of their owners were English. At Blackpool, it was Karl Oyston and his father, Owen Oyston, who, really made a hash of it. And of course, when the fans spoke out, and I think the fans have got every right to speak out. Don't get me wrong, there's fans that still have a go at Jim Favola and Bill Foley here. I don't understand it because we're in the best shape we've ever been in. There was fans that had a go at Jeff Mostyn and Eddie Mitchell all those years ago. Yet those men were men that saved this football club and actually got this football club motoring forwards. Blackpool fans had every right to have a go at Owen Oyston and Karl Oyston and where that money was going and what was happening at that football club and how it was being driven into the ground. And they still never really have recovered. They've gone all the way down to League Two. They managed to get themselves into the Championship, but they was never able to sustain that. And then Bury was a completely sad case where somebody come in who didn't really understand football. He was English. Before anybody turns around and says, well, it's always foreign owners, it's not always foreign owners. Steve Dale was English, didn't really get football, was never really interested in Bury, and basically killed a football club. And to be honest, I don't think he really invested much into that football club at all at Bury. And Karl and Owen Oyston, by the sounds of things, and I can't vouch for this, sounds like they got their money back and some by that promotion to the Premier League. I've spoken to Kieran Maguire before, Manny, and we've gone into this in some depth, but there has to be a way that football fans can see exactly what's coming into a football club, what's going out of a football club, and what if the owners are taking stuff out or putting stuff in, like Chansiri, Dejphon going for the golden egg and then failing, so they can actually see exactly what's going on at their football club rather than Blackpool and Bury fans that were left in the dark.
Oh, I agree completely. And, when you have this idea that the fans are just there to be taken for a ride and not really, you shouldn't have to display any kind of accountability towards them as an owner, then, you're in trouble. And that's a little not too different from any rogue politician who sees it fit to, govern the way they see fit without realizing that they are, servants of the public who voted for them and not meant to be, these tyrants who are on, ego-driven power trips or financial, frivolity, as it were. So I completely agree. And I will also say as a caveat that getting football in and of itself will not be a guarantee that things will be rosy. I mean, you only need to take a look at Jim Ratcliffe to see that, there are a lot of teething problems with Manchester City, and certainly the way, he's been conducting things. It's like austerity in excelsis. And I'm not too sure that's what any football club will want. We all remember the financial issues that took place during COVID. In the case of Blackpool, obviously, as you mentioned, they did get quite fortunate in that they, were able to, what can I say, enjoy the golden egg, as it were, getting promoted to the Premier League. But again, I think if memory serves me right, Ian Holloway was the manager that season.
He was, yes. Yep.
I'm not too sure personally how he was able to handle the day-to-day strife of managing the club with all of this uncertainty hanging over him. And again, when you're in a situation where the performances also aren't really showing much sign of improving, but again, you can't blame the players. It's once again a complete vicious cycle. And it was, especially in the case of Portsmouth as well, and I'm coming back to this as an example, and obviously, Harry being connected will certainly bring it close to home, I'd like to think. When you consider that 2 years ago they had won the FA Cup with Sol Campbell lifting the trophy and were competing in Europe and, hoping for bigger and better things, to lose all of that and be forced into administration, it felt surreal to the point of macabre seeing them play in the 2010 FA Cup final, knowing that they were relegated, going down in administration and having everything. I mean, they literally were given every single punishment of which you could think, and they still came out and competed and only lost 1-0. But, while Portsmouth were able to survive, the clubs that you've mentioned, Blackpool and Bury, have had to struggle a little bit. And that's another reason why I think we have to start to consider making some of these football clubs a little bit more, fan-owned, community-owned, and make it more of a community-based initiative. So that will bring it, a lot closer to the fans. Because when you consider that the big clubs, for instance, have their own, vehicles and means by which they can bring the game to the closer community, especially since there will be fans all over the country that are fans of these big teams. They have the financial means of doing so, but some of these smaller clubs probably won't. And the worst part is, the more this is going to go unchecked, the greater the risk of some of these clubs being, almost wiped off the map. And you definitely don't want to see that. And I'm taking a look at Bury right now. It is, of course, in the in one of the lower tiers of the football pyramid. They're in the Northern Premier League, and they actually had to merge with another Phoenix club, Bury AFC, and that might not have been all too different from what happened with Wimbledon when they faced all of their difficulties and almost disappeared, but then somehow made a reappearance. And so, as happy as I am that these clubs are now back, they never should have been lost to us in the first place. So we've got to make sure that fans are a lot more connected and involved. And invariably, what's going to happen is that trying to get the fans involved will almost effectively become a glorified GoFundMe, as it were. But if that's the way it goes, then you've got to say, so be it. It shouldn't have to be this way. But then, that's why these owners are called rogue owners.
Well, this sort of thing needs to stop. And I'm just going to read a piece, actually, with regards to Karl and Owen Oyston, more Owen Oyston than his son at Blackpool. And, the situation, how this should never, ever, ever in a million years be allowed to happen. And every fan should be able to see exactly where the money is going that the club have earned on the pitch. Don't get me wrong. If an owner wants to lend their club X amount, and it's a sensible X amount, not, a ridiculous like Dejphon or Dejphon Chansiri, if it's a sensible amount, then okay, if they need to claim back, 5-10 million off that club in the future, fair enough. But fans should be able to see this. But here's a bit from Wikipedia. It's been pulled from a number of sources, including the BBC. So on the 6th of November 2017, Oyston and his son Karl were found in a High Court judgment to have operated an illegitimate stripping of Blackpool FC, paying 26.77 million out of the club to companies they owned. The court found that Oyston and his son had abused their majority shareholding position at the club in a manner that was detrimental both to the business and Belkalon, who was the other party within Blackpool, Valerie Belkalon. They were subsequently ordered to pay 31 million to buy Belkalon share out of the business, of which more than 25 million, along with costs, were still owed. Club supporters were hopeful that the amount set by the High Court was so high that the Oyston family would be forced instead to sell its interest. A few days later, following the court decision on the 10th of November, the Oystons decided to put the club up for sale. However, had that not happened, I think we would have probably seen the death of a football club before we saw effectively the death of Bury. And this is why there needs to be that accountability that every football fan should be able to go, right, this is my club or another football club, and see exactly where that money is being accounted for.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And obviously, in the case of certain clubs, like, as I mentioned, Aston Villa, who are still, financially having to, juggle everything around despite doing so well on the field, their fans are at least being kept aware of the situation, because they know that what happened to Leeds and Portsmouth and other clubs back in the day should not be allowed to happen to Villa. And, their owners, I'd like to think, are being quite responsible about the whole thing. Obviously, being very candid about the issue of PSR. But the biggest issue with them, of course, is that their turnover regarding wages and revenue is actually quite high. They spend quite a lot of their revenue on wages, and that's obviously going to be a bit of a risky strategy if the club isn't as successful as it needs to be. But as I mentioned, they balance it out with a net spend, meaning that, they effectively have to sell before they can buy, and then everything is sort of tallied together. And as long as they're within the acceptable range, as long as they don't spend too much, they're in the clear. But it's not easy. And so I'm glad that Bury is now more or less, rescued in a way. But then, as you said, had it not been for the courts getting involved, who knows what would have happened to Bury? And it shouldn't be that. It shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be that way.
100%. Well, I tell you what, let's go on to another type of rogue owner, and we could talk about this all night, to be honest. But another type of rogue owner that effectively killed a football club that had done the unthinkable. It was a story that you would never, ever, ever dream of. It was the Hollywood story before Wrexham actually did it. And that is Wimbledon. They did it on the pitch. They did it with limited investment. They did it with a plough lane that was, effectively falling apart, but was their home and that they loved so much. They got themselves into the top flight. They won the FA Cup. And then somebody come along and took that football club to Milton Keynes. And you know what? This is again, very, very, very interesting story for me. I'm not even going to say the new team's name. I'll say AFC Wimbledon's, because the Wimbledon fans are absolute credit to themselves that they've done it all again. But I won't say, we'll refer to the other team as Milton Keynes. I think they need to drop the last bit. But again, I can relate to this because, back in the 1980s, Robert Maxwell, whose daughter is also not particularly well thought of, let's say, at this moment in time, decided that he was wanting to merge both Reading and Oxford United and turn a team into Thames Valley Royals and play games at Didcot. Luckily for those two clubs, it didn't happen. However, for Wimbledon fans, it did. And never should Pete Winkleman ever have been able to do that. And it is possibly the biggest stain on English football, I think that there will ever be in my lifetime that was allowed to happen to a club who had earned their way to where they were by playing well under the Wimbledon name, and then Milton Keynes come along and took it all.
It's horrible. And you talk about the history of Wimbledon and how, that history was almost effectively wiped away before, it somehow ended up coming back. Again, it's something that shouldn't quite have happened, really. And I don't know necessarily who was responsible for this happening. Because here's the thing. We can criticize, the people involved with, Milton Keynes, and I will go along with that as much as possible. But it always takes two to tango, and you have to think that there might have been a few people on the side of Wimbledon at the time who, just allowed things to take their course without really without really subjecting things to such scrutiny. And then, people like them who are happy to see that happen are sort of, they're no different from what they'd call moles, really, sort of double agents, as it were. And that makes it all the more disgusting. So, as you said, I'm glad that Wimbledon have been able to, recover and then find their way back. And because it goes without saying, really, that these are the types of clubs who have, left their impact on the game in a way. And you really don't want to see such clubs like that with the history that they have go down at all. You just don't. You just don't. And still there are going to have to be a lot of questions that the people responsible will have to answer as to how it could have happened. Because what happened then should never, ever be repeated. And you just never know which club could end up, being next. And that's why I would say that in addition to having greater scrutiny of potential owners, I'd like to see the fans being a little bit more involved. And certainly if it's at that Wimbledon-like level, which is sort of a mid-club that can have its occasional moment of glory, but not consistently go too much higher, then it can be more of a possibility. I think once you start getting big, it's very difficult for you to arrest or negate that growth. And so that's another reason why clubs like Spurs and other clubs will probably never be subject to as many big financial issues, but they probably won't have that much of a relationship with the fans either, in that sense of the word.
Well, like you say, very much so. There was people within, Wimbledon at that time who did not help that football club one bit. It goes all the way from Sam Hammam, all the way through to Pete Winkleman, to be honest. And the ownership of that football club, a proud football club, a football club that was built on fans, and the Phoenix Football Club that was built on fans as well. That original football club was ruined, and it should never, ever, ever have happened. The great thing is, and the beautiful story of this, Manny, is that Wimbledon did reclaim their history. It would be great to see AFC Wimbledon get back into the top flight at some point, because I think that would be mission complete. I think any football fan across the country, should, and I'm sure will AFC Wimbledon to do just that. It might take decades to do, but if it happens, I think that chapter can be closed. And the continuation and all that history that you mentioned, it did feel like at that time that it was being erased. I think it's been reclaimed, and AFC Wimbledon fans had to really, really, really fight to actually get their own history back. But they did, because it was never Milton Keynes's. It was always Wimbledon's history. And it's good to actually see them succeeding and surpassing the club that stole their football team.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm really glad that they did, because, if I can't say I've actually had the pleasure of going to the MK Dons ground to watch a game, but if I had gone to their home ground and seen some stuff about how they would possibly claim when did they win that FA Cup? I think it must have been in
1988, wasn't it?
Yeah, 88. Yeah, that's right.
Mm.
So if they had tried to claim that, I mean, that would have been absolute sacrilege in every single way. So, as you say, Craig, I'm really glad that they were able to fight tooth and nail and get it back. It never should have been lost in the first place, but then it's like that biblical parable about the lost sheep. Do you rejoice about the 99 sheep that are still with you, or do you rejoice about the fact that the sheep you thought you lost has come back? So I'm sorry for bringing religion into this, but I thought I couldn't think of a proper epithet.
Very, very, very true. It's very, very true. But yeah, onwards and upwards for AFC Wimbledon. We are going to round it up in just a moment, but I think there's a couple of other things that we want to cover. And of course, we've mentioned PSR. Forest would deduct points, Everton would deduct points. And then, of course, there's Manchester City with all their charges. This is the other side of rogue owners. I wouldn't call the Man City owners rogue. I'd call them very, very good owners, in all honesty. What they've done for that football club is phenomenal. However, if there is rules that have been broken, and I know why, and I've spoken to several people about this, who are more media trained than I am. And it's a case that the Premier League could see that it was going to take way, way, way too long to sift through 115 charges of Man City's. And it was much easier to pick on the Forest and Everton of the world. It's just wrong. It's wrong because at the end of the day, it isn't a level playing field. Is it now a point where if an owner has so much power, like Man City's does, to the Premier League, and the Premier League would be a lesser place without Manchester City in it, let's be fair, nowadays. I remember when they were relegated out of the Premier League. Isn't that another big danger?
In terms of a club like Manchester City being allowed to, operate like a law unto itself, it is a big danger. And what's even more dangerous, it has to be said, Craig, is the fact that for a long time now, they were made to feel as though they could get away with it with such impunity.
Yeah.
Now, the thing about these charges, mind you, is that they're literally used in some ways by some of the fan base as a stick to try to beat us with people, going around saying, oh, you're still hopeful about those over 100 charges. You're claiming that City should, be demoted from the Premiership, and their achievements and accomplishments should retroactively be named Arsenal's. All that stuff is actually quite pathetic, and any fan who sees it fit to talk about that is absolutely, deluded in every sense of the word. But then, as you said, financial impropriety is no joke, and there is going to have to be a reckoning, especially as to how all of these activities in terms of business and improving the club were actually done, because I wouldn't say the projection at the time, but the idea was that City couldn't necessarily be criticised because they were always above board. Now we know that may not necessarily be the case. And again, this is another reason why these foreign owners have got to get to grips with the British tax system and make sure they know exactly how to, cope with things. Because for what it's worth, I don't think City have been defaulting on their payments to HRMC, but obviously the way they've been spending their money has been, called into question, and there will be some issues to talk about more in detail. But, again, this sort of segues back into what we were talking about, namely how some of these owners have to be scrutinized. Because, in effect, when the when Sheikh Mansour's family bought Manchester City, that was pretty much the end of the struggle, as it were, because gone were the days where, City would, struggle to sort of stay competitive, especially after working so hard to get back into the Premier League. Now they started to really challenge for the bigger honours. But again, how they've done it, if they indulged in practices that weren't exactly above board, then questions are going to have to be asked about the owners and whether or not they're fit for purpose, and whether they should, in fact, be forced to, undergo some kind of financial punishment, maybe some travel bans, or maybe a demotion.
But they won't do it, Manny. They won't do it because it is like, I honestly cannot see them actually demoting Manchester City to the Championship, because it is like giving your rival, I don't know, think of anything, in the world, be it sofa makers or, football manufacturers. Say, for example, Real Madrid, biggest club in the world, of course, Adidas make the football kits. They're not going to, because of something that maybe Real Madrid have done, give Real Madrid to Nike, because it's going to affect the brand and it's going to affect the Premier League. And that's now the danger that we have. Whereas the Premier League, Manny, would you agree with me? They weren't too bothered about losing Nottingham Forest, and they definitely weren't too bothered about losing Everton. If either of those teams went down, it would be like, well, at the end of the day, they've been relegated, or, whereas Manchester City being relegated, it's all about the brand. What happens to Haaland? What happens to that success that they've built up? And like you say, there is those people that will ask them to be stripped of titles, which I think you come at it in the most sensible way that I've heard, really.
If you remember in the early 90s, Craig, Marseille were stripped of a lot of their European Cup after it was found that they had fixed one of their games in the previous league season to win Liga, to qualify for the European Cup and go on to win it. And they were also demoted. And so they were you know how big Marseille are in France.
Yes.
And they had to struggle to, get back on top. And if memory serves me right, the likes of Chris Waddle and Tony Cascarino, England and Ireland internationals, actually went over there on free transfers to play for the club and start the process of them, coming back up. If they're demoted to the Championship, Craig, you wouldn't bet against them coming back up. Yeah. Yes, they would have to sell the majority of their world-class players, including Erling Haaland and a lot of the foreigners as well. And if, clubs would have to be punished for some very serious financial irregularities, then, there is a part of me that thinks that could very well happen. It could. The only question is, of course, as you mentioned, will the Premiership be willing to actually do the right thing and, bite that bullet, especially if, as you say, they wouldn't mind about a club like Nottingham Forest or, Everton, or even, a middle to high club like Aston Villa going down, because Villa actually went down in 2016 and had to fight tooth and nail to get promoted again. And since then, since they've come back, they've They played some wonderful football, really, punched above their weight and provided a lot of joy to the fans. But PSR has literally been, pecking at the back of their heads just like a woodpecker. But again, something will have to be done for any kind of financial irregularity. And maybe if you were to give them a punishment, it could also send a message to some of the other clubs whose finances are not necessarily in the best of order that basically, your days are numbered. You can't, continue to cook the books and just, live on the financial edge. You got to be a lot more responsible. And I think that is sort of one thing that could come from this. Now, again, with Spurs, as our friend Eugene told you, they don't spend too much money on the football side of things, but they do enjoy, seeing the Tottenham Stadium become a wonderful revenue source in many other ways, whether it's hosting an NFL game or, a concert or what have you. But they're financially sound. They don't spend too much money, which means that although they continue to effectively run a healthy profit, they don't win very much. And one of the reasons why Ange Postecoglou was sacked after that brilliant Europa League win was because the board knew that they'd have to start spending more money to accommodate what Ange wanted. That is a better squad of players and, more investment to compete in the Champions League. They didn't want to do that, you see. They wanted the penny in the bun. And it was just as well that Spurs, who were playing later tonight, ended up qualifying for the knockout stages automatically. But then, aside from one or two games, their opponents are absolutely awful. But again, it goes back to, how financially astute some of these owners are. And that's why you will never see the likes of Spurs or Arsenal or other clubs that conduct their business, at least in theory, in the right way, get in trouble with, PSR or, be in trouble with the courts on 115 charges of transfer-related impropriety. So it'll remain to be seen what sort of punishment Manchester City get. I do fear, though, Craig, that in the end, as you insinuate, it'll just be, a hefty fine and a warning about future conduct. And we all know that despite any warning, they're going to continue to stretch everything to the maximum to get whatever they want. You've got to do the right thing to win. And they say everything is supposedly fair in love and war. Football may be a labor of love, but in many ways, it's also war.
Exactly. Well, I tell you what, one last topic that I want to cover off, and we did touch upon it beforehand. I've touched upon it before about Evangelos Baranakis at Nottingham Forest, what is going on there. Now, this is not an owner that is financially stripping a football club. This is an owner that is probably running a football club in a bizarre way. And it's getting now to a point where you can see that it's affecting a football club. We've seen it at Watford as well. Admittedly, I think Watford's another place, but should football fans have that say against somebody like Marinakis, who's gone through 4 managers this year, has sacked straight away the manager that's got him into Europe, which is, completely and utterly bizarre, because I think Nuno Espirito Santo is a very, very good manager. Should there be some sort of restriction on this front?
Sadly, Craig, when it comes to employment-related decisions, in the end, the owners are always going to have the final say. If it were that simple, that owners wouldn't be allowed to hire and fire employees at will, the fans would definitely have a say in it, and it would certainly be, a case of one big happy family. Of course, as you found out with Gary O'Neill being sacked, despite the fine job he did keeping Bournemouth in the Premiership after Scott the Binman Parker, just flew the tree, as it were. I actually hope that he would stay, but I think the results near the end of the season probably pointed to a little bit of a trend which could have continued into the following season. That was why they made the decision to relieve him of his duties and bring Andoni Iraola in. And if these decisions that are taken end up, really benefiting the club, then the fans aren't going to complain. What will be a source of complaint is if, in the case of Forest, managers are being sacked, the football isn't improving, the results are terrible, and the club, despite doing very well to reach the knockout stages of the Europa League, are now in a situation where they could also end up getting relegated. They're in even more serious relegation trouble than Spurs and Leeds at the moment. And I will say right now that whoever wins that game between Tottenham and not Forest, the Ange Postecoglou derby, or the Nuno derby, or whatever. I mean, the number of clubs that have managers that have managed both of those clubs is rather staggering in a way. Whoever wins that will effectively give themselves a better chance of staying up, because that is a 6-pointer in Excelsis.
Yeah.
So, again, sadly, it's a case in this particular case when it comes to hiring and firing employees. The owners and the ownership team will always have the final say, and that is something that we will have to, just accept. One possible silver lining is that if Forest do end up getting relegated, they're not going to have too many tears shed for them, especially in lieu of the whole controversy last season involving them and Crystal Palace, which saw Oliver Glasner's team get demoted to the Conference League when they should have been playing in the Europa League. Yeah, but technicalities and otherwise. Like I said, not too many people are going to shed tears over them, and more's the pity because of the history of that club. But sadly, as I said, unless Forest get relegated, I don't think we'll necessarily see a change in ownership, and that's going to be something that will, really affect things going forward. So we'll have to see what happens. If Forest end up staying up, then Marinakis will feel all the more vindicated. But if they go down, there could be some changes.
Well, Marinakis, to be honest, could well have relegated his own football club, because I thought that they were on to a good thing with Nuno. But there we are. That's what he's done wrong. But Manny, let's sign off. The big question now, we've gone through Sheffield Wednesday, Wigan, Reading, Bolton Wanderers, Derby County, Morecambe, Sheffield Wednesday. I've probably mentioned several clubs twice.
Only Sheffield Wednesday, I counted.
Only Sheffield Wednesday, there we are. Did I mention Bury as well?
No, you didn't. You were coming to Blackpool and Bury, I think.
Yeah, yes. Wimbledon, Blackpool. Those clubs have had rogue owners. Who's next?
Who's next? I really couldn't tell you. I really couldn't. No, And the worst part is it could very well be that some of these clubs that are trying to stay in the league and avoid being demoted to the National League could end up, suffering from rogue ownership. It could very well be that case. And so all we're going to have to do is just keep our eyes peeled more than anything else.
Exactly. But really, I think, football does have a problem with rogue owners, and, more should be done to give fans a say. But there we go. That is my final say. Everybody, thank you for watching. If you are watching on YouTube, if you are listening on Spotify, Amazon, Apple, wherever you listen to all your podcasts, thank you for lending us your ears. And we are going to be back next week, aren't we, Manny? With VAR. Has football got a problem about VAR, Manny?
It shouldn't be a problem, but it is. And there are many reasons why it's a problem. A lot of things have to be done to improve it. Whether or not they will be done will remain to be seen. But I'm looking forward to discussing it.
Definitely. And if you have any topics that you want me and Manny to discuss and debate, do put them in the comments below. Has football got a problem? As I've said here, football has got a problem. It's got several problems, and we're going to cover off every single one. But Manny, always a pleasure, mate. And no doubt we'll see you next week, mate.
Never at shore. Can't wait for more. Thank you, mate.
Look at that.
Always a pleasure.
Master of words. Thank you for joining us. Hit like, hit subscribe, hit the bell button. We'll see you soon. Thank you for joining us.
The TalkSport Fan Network.
The ultimate on-demand destination for the UK's best fan-led football podcasts.
Want authentic supporter insight on all things Bournemouth? Follow Up the Cherries in all departments on the TalkSport Fan Network.
Club-dedicated content created by the fans, for the fans.
Search TalkSport Fan Network.